You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. Today I'm joined by Jason Menzo, CEO of the Foundation Fighting Blindness, one of the most influential leaders in the biomedical research ecosystem. Jason was appointed CEO of the Foundation Fighting Blindness in July 2022 after serving 4 years as the organization's Chief Operating Officer and President. Under his leadership, the foundation has become the world's largest private funder of research for treatments and cures of blinding retinal degenerative diseases, having raised over $954 million since its inception in 1971. Jason brings more than 20 years of ophthalmologic industry experience to his role. Before joining the foundation, he was co-founder and business head unit of Sun Ophthalmologics, where he built and led a commercial team of over 100 professionals. Prior to that, he co-founded the U.S. business for Nycox SA and held positions of increasing responsibility with Bausch Lomb, Inspire Pharmaceuticals, and Bayer Healthcare. The Foundation Fighting Blindness has achieved remarkable impact under Jason's leadership. The organization currently funds over 100 research projects across 86 laboratories and clinical research institutions. Perhaps most notably, the foundation played a major role in the development of Luxturna, the first FDA-approved gene therapy for the eye or any inherited disease. Through its Venture Philanthropy arm, the R&D Fund, which Jason helps oversee, the foundation has invested over $126 million in direct mission-related investments with a remarkable 8-to-1 leverage ratio. Beyond his role at the foundation, Jason serves on the board of directors for Retina International, the leading global umbrella organization for patient-led charities and foundations, and previously served on the Global Council of Advisors and Advocates for SightLife. He holds a BA in Business, Corporate Communications, and Philosophy from Oakland University. Welcome to the podcast, Jason. So excited to have you here on the air.
Thanks, Lisa. Great to be here.
Well, we have a lot to talk about today, and I thought, Jason, the best place to start the podcast was to ask you if you could share a little bit about your journey with us, because you were in the pharmaceutical industry for a number of years, and now you're leading one of the world's most prominent disease-focused foundations. So talk to us a little bit about what drew you to the Foundation Fighting Blindness.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me, and it's great to be able to talk about some of the topics we're going to talk about today. My career is not typical. I wouldn't say that this was a standard journey by any means. But really what drew me to the foundation specifically from the biotech and pharma industry was this desire to do more with advancing treatments and cures. I spent my whole career, most of it in eye care, and everything from carrying the bag as a sales rep to marketing to leading business units and all sorts of fun things. But the opportunities that I had in the for-profit industry that really excited me the most was when we had a product or service that was really bringing innovation and measurable impact to people's lives. Early in my career, I had an opportunity to bring to market a diagnostic for a rare disease called Sjogren's syndrome. And the opportunity to just see and work closely with patients was really inspiring to me. And when I was approached now back in 2017, it's been 7+ years, to make the shift and come over to a non-for-profit, what really got me excited was the opportunity to sort of relive that and to bring innovation and new ways of doing things. And you'll learn, and we'll talk about how different the Foundation Fighting Blindness is compared to a lot of other organizations in the marketplace, but really to have impact on people's lives. And there's no greater impact in the world of vision than bringing potential treatments and cures for blinding diseases forward. And so as soon as that opportunity became available, I was thrilled to be able to jump at it.
Yeah, and you mentioned doing more, and it's pretty incredible because the foundation has been a driving force in retinal disease research for over 50 years. So talk to us a little bit about how the landscape of biomedical research and commercialization has changed, even just during your tenure. I know you mentioned you've been there since 2017, particularly in the rare disease space.
Yeah, it's really incredible because I actually joined I joined at the very beginning of 2018. And at that time, it was right on the heels of Luxturna being approved by the FDA. And for those who don't know, Luxturna is a gene therapy. It was actually the first gene therapy approved by the FDA for any inherited condition. It happened to be for a rare blinding pediatric condition called LCA, caused by the gene RPE65. And at that time, that was like this lightning rod moment for the field that there is now a treatment. We fast forward to today and we have 50 treatments that are in the clinic. Now, we haven't pushed as many as we'd like across the finish line with the FDA, but the landscape is dramatically different, where at that time it was like, okay, there's one that is sort of at this stage specifically for this one condition. There's, as we'll talk about a little bit later, there's almost 300 different, variants, or, not variants. That's probably not the right word, because like subtypes, just different genes that can cause a blinding disease in our space. And one made it to the finish line. But if you were someone who was affected by RPE65, you were sitting around and saying, well, when is it going to be my turn? There's still a lot of that because there are only 50 and there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. But when I think about it today, there are shots on goal in gene therapies, gene editing, cell therapies, gene-agnostic approaches, small molecules that are aiming at reducing the rate of progression of disease, radical innovations coming out of agencies at the federal government like ARPA-H, aiming at whole eye transplants. I mean, so much radical science that is shifting from just ideas to, becoming a reality. And I think about the 5 years, 7 years, 10 years ahead, and what that's going to look like when some of these things actually continue to mature. It gets me excited.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you really have achieved something remarkable with Luxturna. I want to go back to that for a second, because as you mentioned, first FDA-approved gene therapy for the eye. So I think it would be really interesting if you could walk us through a little bit how the foundation's early investments and research support contributed to this breakthrough, and what lessons this success holds for other rare disease foundations.
Yeah, it's a great case study. So the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and this is before my time, has always been a catalyst. And so we recognize, and that's still the case today, we are by no means able to accomplish what we aim to accomplish by ourselves. We require partnerships, in this case with Luxturna, with the university, with UPenn and CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And our role was really to take a lot of risk and fund a lot of the basic work that enabled a promising technology to see the next stage of development. And by us taking the steps that we took, it enabled a really important partner, the National Eye Institute within the NIH system, to come in and bring incremental funding and additional funding to then take the next step. But then, of course, it only became a reality when industry got involved and the technology was transferred out of Penn and moved into industry, and venture capital got involved, and ultimately the engagement with regulators. I mean, you can string this out as a whole continuum of where did we play? And that time, our role was really to de-risk and fund basic work, $10 million plus worth of really important high risk research that then enabled all the next stages of what happened afterwards to occur. And that model can be, and we have replicated that model many, many times over again. But the thing I would emphasize is how important the partnership is between an organization like the Foundation Fighting Blindness, the university, the researchers, National Institutes of Health, in our case, the National Eye Institute, and then ultimately industry and venture capital. No one aspect of that team does it by themselves. It's really that whole team together that created a decade plus worth of work that led to now treatments in market and changing people's lives.
And I want to stay on this topic of basic research and translation work for a second here, because you alluded to before all these different subtypes. And in fact, I believe the foundation's identified it's over 270 retinal disease causing genes and has played a major role in developing 88% of the treatments that are currently in clinical trials for leading retinal diseases. So talk to us a little bit about how the foundation balances supporting this basic research versus translating this out from a university, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, this exact point is one of the things that keep me up at night.
Because, I bet it does.
It's a really complicated area of what we do. I view our objective, and it's not just what I view, I mean, our mission is very straightforward: to drive the research to provide preventions, treatments, and cures for blinding retinal diseases, including inherited retinal diseases and dry age-related macular degeneration. And, as I said a few minutes ago, and I misspoke when I said, there's different variants. There are different variants. So there's, nearly 300 different genes, but then within each gene, from a technical perspective, there are specific variants within those genes that cause disease. And so, you can subtype a blinding disease many different ways. You can subtype it by clinical diagnosis, in our case, retinitis pigmentosa, as compared to Stargardt disease, as compared to LCA. But each of those buckets and many others have subtypes of genes that are pathogenic. And then each of those genes have subtypes of specific variants that cause disease. And so in some cases, where we are in the state of play for a particular gene, maybe we need just a little bit more to get it over the edge, to get it to the clinic. And so a translational project, or a killer experiment, as we often call it, to ensure that we're ready to go into the clinic is really what is needed. And we have programs and award types specifically for that. In some cases, based on the particular gene or disease, or the variant or what have you, we don't understand enough about the basics. And so we need to fund more understanding of what is actually causing the disease, or how the gene works within the body to, express, whatever. And that's what's causing disease. And so we have specific awards to understand pathology of conditions. There's a big, one of the areas that we're really focused on, there's a big issue with clinical trials that are not successful. And so we have two different approaches there. So how are we designing better clinical trials and endpoints, and working with regulators to ensure that these endpoints are appropriate in their view, so that way if you have success, that everyone wins when ultimately the clinical trial is quote unquote successful. But the other side of it is that, do we have good animal models that replicate disease, so that way before you go in the clinic, you really understand what you're getting into? And so to your exact question, how do we balance those things? So we have a 5-year strategic plan, and we have dedicated resources for each bucket. We have not only, half a dozen plus different specific granting mechanisms, but we have direct funded natural history studies and work with regulators. We have our venture philanthropy model with the R&D Fund, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. And so while we every 5 years develop a strategic plan and allocate specific resources for each of those arenas, we're very nimble and we're very opportunistic. And so we change our mind all the time in terms of saying, hey, we think we need to spend a little bit more in this one area based on the circumstances than we thought, a couple of years ago when we developed the plan. And we've got a very supportive board and experts that help us be opportunistic when opportunities arise.
Yeah, and that happens with research and clinical trials. You have to be able to pivot, depending on what the results are and what the research shows, right? So it's good that you guys have that flexibility.
Yep. Yeah. Going back to that point, the world felt when we launched our venture fund, or the research community especially felt like, the Foundation Fighting Blindness is now only going to be focused on clinical stage industry, translational stage maybe, but we know that can't be the case. We still allocate more today than we have at any point in the past to basic research, because we know that there's so much we still need to learn, especially for those conditions that are still earlier in their understanding.
Now, I think another thing that I found really interesting was you've built a very impressive network of over 40 top clinical centers across 10 different countries, so all around the world. Talk to us about the importance of international collaboration for advancing this rare disease research, and how you manage such a complex global consortium.
Mm-hmm. It's huge. It's really important. And this isn't exclusive in our space. I'm sure many other disease-focused foundations like us that work in rare disease find the same challenges where patients are dispersed, right? So not everyone with a particular rare condition lives in one zip code or lives in one country. And so if our desire is to advance treatments and cures, then that involves fielding clinical trials. And oftentimes one center doesn't have more than a handful of patients in a particular, if that, maybe one or two patients in a specific disease area. And so it's an absolute must that we engage the global clinical community. I'm sure many others that work in a similar space find this to be the case as well, where it is a global community, but it feels very close knit and it doesn't feel too big. The 40 plus people, and you could even say 100, individuals that are engaged in our space, if they're in Europe, in Asia, or here in the States, it doesn't matter because they all talk to each other once a week or, once a month. And we have really close knit relationships with them. And we get together frequently, multiple times, certainly annually for our consortium, but there are multiple, between the vision research conferences and things of that nature that folks see each other regularly, and it feels like a very close knit community. You forget that the person that you're working with every day is in Australia, for example. You don't think it doesn't feel that big.
Now, you alluded to the R&D Fund a couple minutes ago, and this fund I know has been around since about 2018, and it was a pretty novel approach when you started it. What was the thinking behind creating this investment vehicle, and how does it complement some of the traditional grant making?
So, I go back to our mission, and, the mission is not to fund research, period. It's to deliver cures. And to deliver cures, if you say that, you think of it almost like, okay, there's now a cure that's available in the marketplace. Let me work backwards to the origin story of where that treatment started. And it's not too many steps backwards from the market that you run into industry. Right. So ultimately, industry is typically who commercializes assets. Certainly that intersection where a great promising technology that's, either translational stage or IND ready, or maybe even, killer experiment before you can kind of get to that stage. And oftentimes really promising technology at that stage is coming out of the university and spinning into industry. And prior to 2018, we didn't really have a good model on how to continue to have a seat at the table when that happened. And we talked a little bit earlier about Luxturna, and we didn't have the R&D fund at that time. So we were able to play the role that we played. But ultimately, as that treatment advanced into industry, into the clinic, ultimately engaging with regulators, we played some roles, but not as active as we could. And if we're an organization focused on driving treatments forward, we wanted to have a much more active role. And so we established the fund in 2018. And really what it does is it picks up the baton from this relay race is this way I always think of it. It picks up the baton from promising technology when they transfer out of university setting into industry. And it gives us on our side a different vehicle to continue to fund that great promising work and have a seat at the table in helping to drive it forward. I love it. It's been really successful. And most importantly, in the measure of success, certainly there's a financial component to it, but the measure of success when we think about it is how many clinical and regulatory milestones have been achieved in companies that we funded that would not have otherwise happened. And that's really that's the scoreboard in my mind.
Well, it's really been extraordinary, this fund, because it's achieved an 8-to-1 leverage ratio. So basically for every dollar you invest, you attract 8 more from private capital. How have you managed to achieve that kind of leverage, and what advice would you give to other foundations considering this type of venture philanthropy approach?
Yeah, what you just said is really the secret sauce to the fund, because in everything we recognize, even as we said a little bit earlier, that we don't have the ability, nor do we want to go it alone. We want to have partnerships and collaboration. Early in the development process of a treatment, our partners are academic researchers, tech transfer offices, other funders, other foundations, the National Institutes of Health, NIH, NEI. But when you get to the stage where it's shifted into industry, our collaborators are venture capitalists. And you're exactly right that for every dollar that we invest in a company, we have been able to attract 8 to 10. Actually, it's even growing since we published the stat on our website. So $8 to $10 of private capital. And how do we do that? Well, first of all, we syndicate with a large number of blue chip venture capital investors that are specifically focused on either rare disease or ophthalmic vision research. The list of co-investors in our companies is dozens and dozens. I think it's up to 50 or something like that, 50, maybe 60. And when the Foundation Fighting Blindness through the R&D Fund makes an investment in a company, the capital that we invest is like the least important thing. And what I mean by that is that it's really all the other value that we bring to a company that really helps it to succeed. We put all of the resources that we have behind the success of a company we invest in. And that includes the patient voice through our network of chapters and obviously the patient community, our genetic testing program, the insights from our patient registry, like everything. And I think that other VCs see that and they say, well, if the Foundation Fighting Blindness through the R&D Fund has invested in this company, I hesitate to say we're smart money because it sounds a little like we're patting ourselves in the back, but we know the space really well. And so I think that when people see that we've invested in a company, that they have confidence that it's been well vetted and that there's something, but things still fail, right? So things more will fail than succeed, but that by having us involved in a company, it gives a little bit of a stamp of confidence that it's on the right track.
Really, the fund's amazing. You have 160 million under management and 16 investments in your portfolio. Given all this and what you've said so far about the fund, talk to us about how you select companies for investment and what criteria distinguish a good fund investment from a traditional research grant recipient.
Sure. That's really important because when we are making investments out of the fund, it is a different set of criteria. It's a different game. It's a different setup than when we're making a grant. And so we have a very thorough due diligence process. I actually want us to trademark it because it's so thoughtful in terms of the different stages by which we evaluate companies, our deal flow and the opportunities to invest, even as rare a space as the broad marketplace might think this is. Every single day, it seems like there are companies that come to us looking for an investment, and many of them are very buttoned up and well qualified, and the technology is great, and we don't have enough money to invest in everything. So we're extremely selective. We turn down investments. I don't know the ratio, but I mean it's probably something like 10 to 1, if not more. I mean, we are very selective at where we invest, and of course, it starts with the technology. And when we do due diligence on a technology, oftentimes we have funded it through our grants and awards program previously. And so oftentimes we know the technology very well, but not always. Sometimes it comes from a program that we didn't fund or comes from, something that is, licensed from another, area that we didn't have a lot of experience with, another disease state, for example. And so we do due diligence not just with our staff, but ultimately we leverage our entire scientific advisory board. We have access to the greatest, most experienced thought leaders in the world as it relates to our space. And so we've got a Rolodex of really high quality experts that we can tap on the shoulder and say, can you please help us do due diligence on this technology? But technology is only one part of it. We then, of course, have a lot of diligence on management. On other investors and whether or not the investors, because oftentimes companies are not one-trick ponies. They may have one asset in our space, but other assets outside of our space. And if the board of the company is not committed to inherited retinal diseases, and we invest in a company because they have one asset in an inherited retinal disease, but then they have two other assets in a totally other area of medicine, that's risk for us that we're going to be investing in a company that isn't going to continue to pursue our asset, our space. And so really having confidence in the board, sometimes we'll even put particular language around our investment that requires it to be specifically for the, inherited retinal disease program. And then the last is the financial risk. And so whether the company has enough capital to do the work that ultimately it's set out to do, whether the company is, our money is going to be immediately diluted out. There's the whole financial aspect of this because unlike a grant, we do expect to make a return. And so even if it's just a one-to-one, it's not like we have traditional venture capital math that we're looking for, but we do want to make a return so we can replay the investment again and again and again in an evergreen model.
Makes a lot of sense. And, I want to ask you now about a piece of legislation that's pending, the Venture Philanthropy Enhancement Act, also known as VPA or VIPA, maybe the way you say it. I don't know.
VPEA.
Yeah, I like that better than VIPA. That's so weird sounding. But I know you're supporting this legislation because it would provide tax incentives for private investors who co-invest with foundations like yours. How would this legislation change the venture philanthropy landscape, and why do you think this is needed now?
So it would be transformational for our field and for our landscape. And I'm really proud of this. Actually, it originated with the chair of our board. This is her concept.
Congratulations.
This last year over the holidays, she had a little bit of time on her hands and started, with a blank Word document and started brainstorming concepts that could be innovations. She's a brilliant woman in the financial policy world professionally. And so she threw a straw man over my way and we started noodling and playing with this. And ultimately, the next thing you know, we're here late in the year. And, fingers crossed, as we're recording this in the day 2 of a government shutdown.
I know.
So things are a little bit haywire as to what the future looks like with this act, but we were on track to have it introduced this fall. And I still believe that will happen. I have high confidence that will happen. Why is this needed? Well, what it is, first of all, the concept is exactly what you described. So let's take a promising technology that's sitting at a university today. And that technology is licensed into industry and venture capital dollars come around it. Well, oftentimes, this is still part of the valley of death. When we think about the valley of death, we often think about getting it to the clinic. But from a business standpoint, that's also the financial valley of death, because ultimately, there's a lot of risk at that stage as to whether or not there's going to be enough capital to do what's needed to move it into clinic and then ultimately to finish the clinical trials and get it to market. And there's an immense amount of pressure on companies that are pursuing treatments for rare disease. And the pressure isn't just for them to execute operationally. It's not just that the drug will or will not work in the clinic, but it's for them to raise enough money and create enough interest from the investment world that this is something that ultimately will pay a return. Because even though we have a model where we're happy to get our money back, most other investors are not happy just to get their money back. And so the pressure that mounts on rare disease companies in particular is immense. And so the concept of this bill is that if a fund like the R&D Fund, which is our Venture Philanthropy Fund, a 501c3 through a Venture Philanthropy Fund invests in a company. So Company X licensed the technology from University Y. Company X attracts an investor like the R&D Fund to invest in it, or perhaps we started the company, which we've done a number of times as well. But if the Venture Philanthropy Fund is a investor in the company, that any other co-investors, for-profit co-investors, invest alongside when they realize a return, and that may be a decade down the road, because again, clinical development may take a long time, and it may be quite a while before returns are realized. When they realize a return, that they realize also a tax preference in the form of a tax credit that ultimately will offset their tax liability on those gains. And the real model here is aimed at leveling the playing field so rare disease companies can attract for-profit investors in a way that they can't today. One of our companies knocked on about 1 million doors to seek other for-profit investors, and the company was. I'm shocked that it survived. I mean, it was like down to the last penny, and then down to the last penny again, and then down to the last penny again, and eventually, the tide turned, and it took a lot of work from our end at the venture, at the R&D Fund, from the Venture Philanthropy Fund, and obviously management of the company. And it shouldn't be that way, because now the company is in the clinic, delivering incredible results. The first patient, I'll just tell this quick story. This first patient in this trial was 28 years old, had no vision from birth, like couldn't count fingers, like hand-waving vision only, could sense hand-waving vision. This is the company that ultimately was dead. I mean, we were bridging the company month after month after month to keep it alive until other investors eventually got in. Well, back to the patient. 30 days after the first dose in the phase 1/2 clinical trial was able to read letters on an eye chart.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
And that result was never going to happen.
Yeah.
If there wasn't capital to start the trial,
Yeah,
and we were, like I said, so the Venture Philanthropy Enhancement Act really is aimed at creating an incentive for for-profit investors to co-invest in these types of companies. And the validation that these are the right companies is that a venture philanthropy fund is invested in them.
It's really a brilliant idea. It's a long time coming. So fingers crossed that it gets introduced, and hopefully it will pass through whenever our government decides to restart itself here. So Jason, I thought it would be helpful if you could explain some of the various funding opportunities the foundation offers to academic investigators and the types of projects and career stages you support.
Absolutely. One of the things, as we talked a little bit about it earlier, that one of the things that we're very, very aware of and passionate about is the fact that not every disease in our field is at the same stage. And one of the critical ingredients of success is having more people working on the problem. And so we do have dedicated awards and mechanisms to attract talented investigators to our field. We have a fellowship award that goes all the way, a postdoctoral fellowship award, career development awards, individual investigator awards, awards that are focused on clinical innovation, disease models, specific disease states, like one particular gene that is of high interest to us, that we've got a particular channel focusing just on that gene that's funded by a very interested family in this particular area. And then we have translational awards specifically for translating promising technology, getting it ready to go into the clinic. And that award is named after our prior chair, the David Brent Family Translational Research Award. So there's a variety of different mechanisms. We fund tens of millions of dollars of grants and awards every year. And they are aimed at everything from attracting young, talented, people in their postdocs to come to the field, all the way through individual investigators. We even have a program project award that incentivizes universities to work with one another. So in order to be eligible for that award type, it requires multiple universities to work together to be eligible.
That's really awesome.
Probably the most attractive thing, though, to someone who's working in a tech transfer office is because of the R&D fund, that the technology that is sitting on the shelf within the university, we have the mechanism to actually get it out of the university into the clinic, into industry, and ultimately can provide a return not just to us at the R&D fund, but also these deals often have royalties back to the university and to the investigators. So, it's not just about the awards that we have within the university setting, but the opportunity to actually translate that and get it into the next stage, which ultimately is why the investigators are doing the work in the first place.
Yeah, which sometimes is a really difficult task for a tech transfer office. And you've already got that experience and the contacts, which is going to make that a lot easier on the tech transfer office for sure. So Jason, just some statistics. I know last year that the foundation funded 104 grants globally to 133 investigators across 92 institutions, which is just incredible. So given that, and given that researchers are looking for alternative funding these days, do you have some advice for university researchers who are considering applying for foundation funding? And also share with us what you consider to make a compelling application.
Yeah, absolutely. We publish in our call for applications specific gaps that we're looking to address. And our mission is our thought process is to continue to push the field forward, continue to push the field forward. And so we're often balancing the difference between incremental, moving the field forward incrementally, and breakthroughs. And oftentimes we're finding ourselves trying to push the field more towards the side of breakthroughs. And what are the gaps and the hurdles that are standing in the way to the next breakthrough? And so an investigator that's thinking about applying to the Foundation Fighting Blindness, first of all, we monitor the number of applications for every call for applications, the number of new universities or new researchers who are applying. So we want to broaden the tent. Again, I've said it earlier, we want more people engaged, more people involved. So If you've never been awarded or applied to the Foundation Fighting Blindness before, please do, because we want to widen the tent. We monitor what percentage of awardees are new to the field and things like that. So these are things that we're cognizant of. But really, my advice is we are not, despite the fact that we work really closely with the National Eye Institute within the NIH, we are not the NIH. And so we often find ourselves trying to identify opportunities to de-risk and to push the field forward in a more breakthrough manner. And so my advice is to, if you've got a crazy idea and you think it can address one of the gaps in our field, we're a great funding partner to talk to and have a conversation with our staff before, spending hours and hours and hours on putting something together too. We're always happy to help and chat with researchers, in advance.
Now, you've mentioned the Career Development Awards a couple of times, and they have an impressive 89% retention rate, basically for recipients who continue to work in this area of retinal disease research. So how important do you think these early career awards are to supporting your strategy, and how do you structure these to maximize impact?
Yeah, I mean, they are absolutely critical. And I know that I've been beating this drum a lot in this conversation about how important it is to bring as many people into the field as possible, and so I'm always amazed when I meet a chair of a department of ophthalmology at University XYZ, and they tell me that the first award they ever received ever in their career ever was from the Foundation Fighting Blindness in a Career Development Award or, postdoc award. And so that's a really exciting thing. Our area of research is very innovative and very exciting, and it naturally sparks the curiosity of people who are in the research field. And so I think that when they have exposure to what we do, that they get the hook and they want to stay in this field. But to your point, we intentionally structure these awards in a manner that not only attracts them to the field, but ultimately retains them in the field, and have other award types as the natural handoff to ultimately see, okay, after I'm completed with this award type, here's the next thing in line that I can go for. And many of our awardees are multiple, achieve, granting from multiple award types within our portfolio.
Now, we've talked about the Valley of Death several times during our conversation. Talk to us about how the foundation helps bridge this gap for tech transfer offices and the role that tech transfer offices play within your ecosystem.
Yeah, this is, I think, the existential challenge of what we all do. I mean, this is it. And it's, I said a little bit ago, this idea of the financial valley of death. There's the technical valley of death, because ultimately, translating something from basic research to the clinic. And, we recognize, I said it a little bit ago, that there are not great animal models in a lot of these cases. I'm excited that the field is moving towards, organoids and cellular models that ultimately may be better at replicating human disease. And so ensuring that we've got funding mechanisms and that there's open conversation with tech transfer offices and individual investigators within the research setting to think innovatively about how to, bridge the technical valley of death, but the financial valley of death, which is really the Achilles heel of everything that we do. We don't have all the money in the world. We're very appreciative of our donors and the generosity of people that support this foundation, but we could be putting 10 times the capital to work than we are today and still find that the financial valley of death exists. And so I think that from a university perspective, thinking about what assets you have within the university setting, what you have on the shelf, recognize that the most important thing, and I think this is how I feel about it, the most important thing is to get it to the next step. Get it to the next step. Get it to the next step. The paper value of something that's sitting on the shelf will never be realized if it never gets off the shelf. And so, urge the university tech transfer offices and the university in the university setting just to think through, okay, what do we have that ultimately, who can we partner with to get it out of academia into industry? And the Foundation Fighting Blindness through our venture philanthropy model is a great partner that can help do that, especially in our space.
Now, I know that since 2005, the foundation has supported 440 grants that have resulted in over 12,000 published research articles, which is absolutely incredible. How do you measure the impact of your academic investments beyond traditional metrics like publications?
Yeah, you actually cited one of our most important statistics earlier in this conversation, that 88% of programs that are in the clinic today originated with either grants that we funded or some way that the foundation was actively involved with. And that's huge. That's what we exist for. I don't dismiss the 12,000 published research articles. They're important to help move the field forward, but that isn't the bar in my mind. The bar is how many new programs made it to the clinic, how many new models were created that can help de-risk things that go into the clinic, how many new ways to think about disease, how many breakthroughs have occurred. How many new partnerships have we established, and how many talented people are working on this problem? Those are the things that I really think about, and we measure them. We conducted an impact analysis looking back at 20 years of funding, and we published it, right? And over the 20 years of funding, certainly how many papers were published was a metric. That's an important metric, but all these other metrics are also very important and speak to moving this mission forward.
So, Jason, I wanted to ask you, looking ahead, what emerging technologies or research approaches are you most excited about for treating retinal diseases? And where do you see the biggest opportunities for breakthrough advances?
So when I think about the field, and we go back to this pivotal moment when Luxturna was approved, and the field shifted and focused on gene therapy, gene augmentation specifically. And today, when I look at our portfolio and I think about what the landscape is of where the field is and where we're focused, certainly gene therapies, gene specific and gene targeted approaches, whether it be gene editing, antisense oligonucleotides, or things that are targeting a specific gene or specific mutation, are an important part of the overall approach. What gets me most excited, however, approaches that can affect large chunks of people in a gene-agnostic way, because there are nearly 300 different genes. We talked about it earlier, the different variants that can cause disease within those genes. If we go one by one by one by one by one, we're going to be at this a long time. It's going to take a lot of money. And so what gets me excited is the promise of gene-agnostic therapies, and not just those that slow disease, but that can ultimately turn it around, like cell therapies. We're involved in a program with ARPA-H within HHS, within the federal government, a whole eye transplant. That's not going to be for everyone either. But the fact that there are so many different approaches to try to solve this problem is what gets me excited.
Now, I didn't realize that, blinding disease affects 1 in every 53 people globally. That's an incredible number in an enormous patient population. How do you prioritize which diseases and research approaches to fund when the need is so incredibly vast?
Yeah, it is. And I'll speak just from a human perspective first. The thing that the audience may be thinking when they hear that is, I don't believe that. There's no way that that's the statistic. I don't see that many people who are affected.
I didn't believe it myself, but then I did some digging, and yeah, that's the statistic. Yeah, unfortunately.
The vast majority of people, well, first of all, blindness is a spectrum. And so people who are vision impaired, especially degenerative diseases, that ultimately the end result may be what we traditionally think of as being blind, but ultimately the journey there, which often starts in, teenage years or even younger, and certainly by the time 20s, 30s, 40s, many people who are blind do not want you to know that they're blind. And they are passionate about hiding their blindness. And it is something, actually, this month we have a campaign. It's Blindness Awareness Month, October. And we have the Share Your Vision campaign, where we ask our community to come out and share their experience. And oftentimes this is the first time they're telling their employer, they're telling their social network, they're telling others that they're affected. Because someone who's blind can still look at their phone most of the time until it gets to late stage. And I see these things on social media, and it makes my blood boil. Where this person is blind, they have a walking cane, mobility cane, but yet they're looking at their phone. Well, yeah, they are, and that's because it's not black and white. And so how do we prioritize? Your question is, how do we prioritize which segment to focus on? It's all. So right now we're the research is over-indexed in early-stage interventions. And so this 5-year strategic plan, we've put more resources to late-stage disease and restorative therapies, including prosthetics. But that is another thing that keeps me up at night is how do we serve all needs of our entire community? And it is a tricky balancing act for sure.
So Jason, for university researchers listening who might be interested in applying for foundation funding, what's the best way for them to get started? And are there any upcoming deadlines or opportunities they should know about?
Absolutely. Our website is a wealth of information, fightingblindness.org. There's a specific area of the website. If you go to research and then under research, it's our grants and awards programs that lists all of the different awards and deadlines. And you're exactly right. Coming up this month, our clinical research fellowship award deadline is October 16th. Sprint Family Translational Awards, again, October 16th. We've got award deadlines, application deadlines in November, and then a handful as we get to the turn of the calendar and looking at late winter, early spring.
Well, Jason, it's absolutely incredible what the foundation has done. And like you said, you've been there a while. And I'm curious as the podcast comes to a close, personally for you, what gives you the most hope about the future of treating and curing blinding diseases?
The most hope is that there seems to be much more awareness and focus from every angle, not just in blinding diseases, but in rare diseases as a whole. And I love some of the things that I hear coming out of FDA. I actually have had really good experiences, as have many of our companies, with the new leadership within FDA. And there seems to be more willingness to move quicker on rare disease and be more nimble at how to design studies and move faster. That gives me hope. The technology always gives me hope. I'm blown away. The people in our community blow me away. The energy and the passion and the momentum that we have is real. It's tangible. But ultimately, we need regulators to partner with us. And I see that happening. And so, I feel less likely that we're going to run into a brick wall than I did maybe a couple of years ago, which is exciting.
Well, Jason, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing everything about fighting blindness. You're doing incredible work. And thank you for all that you do and for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Lisa. It was my pleasure.
Thank you, Jason, for sharing your insights on how patient-focused foundations are revolutionizing biomedical research through innovative funding models and strategic partnerships with academia and industry. For university researchers interested in learning more about funding opportunities, visit findingblindness.org. The Foundation's grant application deadlines and program details are available on their website, with multiple funding mechanisms designed to support researchers at every career stage. Thanks for joining us on Autumn on the Air. Until next time, keep fighting to bring university innovations from the lab to life.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.